The Bayeux Tapestry, or the Bayeux Tapestry, is probably the best and most famous example of secular art in the Middle Ages. This tapestry roughly follows a history of the accounts of what's going on in 1066. And tapestry is really a misnomer here, because what we're seeing is something that is embroidery. In other words, a tapestry would be the image is woven into a single piece of fabric. Here we see the fabric as a backing, and then we're seeing needlework used to create the image. It's 200 feet long and likely was meant for a civic or audience hall. And we see this continuous narrative, the events leading up to and including the Norman conquest of Anglo-Saxon England. And we see three main characters. We see Edward the Confessor at the top there. He's an Anglo-Saxon king of England. We see Earl Harold Godwinson off on the left, the Anglo-Saxon counselor to King Edward. He's not a child, he's not an heir, but he is the primary advisor. Edward doesn't have any legitimate heirs. And we see Duke William of Normandy, known as William the Bastard at the time, later William the Conqueror. And he is the illegitimate son, or felt to be the illegitimate son, of King Edward the Confessor. According to the chronicles, it's unclear who Edward wants to appoint as king when he dies. According to the tapestry, though, Edward had chosen William of Normandy before his death. So let's go through the story. Harold is going to be advisor to Edward, who had a son out of wedlock, who is William. William gets Harold to promise to give up the crown. Why? Because Harold has been captured during yet another English-French war, and he's brought to William because the French go, hey, there's a brilliant idea. Let's bring him to William, and we will get serious money for him. And they do. And William says, hey, you know what? I will release you if you give up the crown. So, awesome. Harold's like, yeah, this is great. But then Harold gets the crown from Edward because, of course, he's there. William's off in France. Harold is there. When Edward dies, he gets the crown. And he decides, you know what? I'm going to keep it. So we end up with the Battle of Hastings. Harold comes down from the north after fighting a Viking army and goes to fight William as he has landed at Hastings in England, in the south of England, basically prepared to invade. Lots of issues going on, but eventually we all know that after a very close battle, William of Normandy will win. He becomes William the Conqueror, and the rest is history. When we look at the actual tapestry, we see something very dynamic. We see Greek and Roman influence in the conception and the form of the bodies, although not necessarily in how they're created. They are very linear, but remember, this is an embroidery. So trying to create three-dimensionality when you're dealing with thread that's hard to try and blend, etc., it's going to make sense that they're going to go with a very linear style. Thread, of course, in and of itself is effectively very linear. Along the margins, what we see is in Latin a commentary on the scenes, likely pro-Norman commentary throughout, or written from a pro-Norman perspective. In terms of dating, we believe it's sometime between 1071 and 1097 that this is created. And we can narrow that a little bit more. So in 1071, the monks completed a history of the Dukes of Normandy, and this accounts for the events of 1064 through 1066, which we see in the tapestry. The tapestry itself follows roughly that history. By 1097, Bishop Odo, the man that we believe was the patron of the piece, dies, so we know it's somewhere in there, and we can narrow it down further because to a period between 1070 and 1080, because by 1080, Odo is imprisoned by William, which is not going to make him want to commission a great piece. Now, what happens? We probably have about 200 people, probably nuns, at Canterbury, a place known for its needlework, working together to create this massive piece. And you could imagine there's a central plan or a master plan that they're working from to create this incredible piece of needlework, which today is still considered incredibly impressive and known as the Opus Anglicum, or the English work. As we look through it, as you move through the narrative, you'll also notice, for example, creatures in that lower border and upper border that are symbolic of what's happening during the scene. So we have the narrative, we have the visual, and then we have the symbolism of the creatures as well. Very, very complex, very well thought out piece created by probably 200 nuns in the 11th century. Truly remarkable the more you think about it.